What's happening, folks? This is I Paint Creatures IPC, and I'm back on YouTube posting again. And I'm going to be doing this whole series of videos that are all about my artistic process and creating the epic story experience of MATSU. And MATSU in my last video stands for Making Art Together, Support Unity. So it's not only just making this fantastical, imaginative tale come to life in animation and puppetry and all the great entertainment, it's also the process of what I learned in my life from doing this art and bringing it into reality and collaborating with other artists, amazing artists that a lot of people don't know about, but we're going to get to know them right here on this YouTube channel. So today's dialogue is all about what poetry does for me, the power of poetry. And most people think poetry just rhymes or fancy language and words, and you got to be talented to do it, but everyone uses language. And so poetry, to me, I like to call it a compass, an internal compass. You see, when I write poetry, it's actually writing me, because I discover, unveil, reveal, and orient myself who I am and where I am when I write it. And people think you read poetry too. I read poetry, but when I read my own poetry, it reads me. It tells me who I am and where I am. It orients me in this world. And so on these videos, I'm also going to tap into a lot of the metaphors that I do reveal in my writing, because a lot of my writing is just like how I love to perform and speak the ancient art of poetry. You got to remember, poetry, the original form wasn't written. It was just spoken out loud from the poet, using metaphor and simile and, analogies to explain deeper in the heart. And so there's these terms that come up when I'm creating all the scripts and the stories for the epic story experience of MATSU. And I like to explore some of those. Today, I'm going to explore this term, painted poetic symphony, and what that means to me and what it does for me. So first of all, the first word is painted, right? And I'm not talking about just getting out the brush and the, watercolor and acrylic paint and, oil paint and painting these masterpieces and like I love to do, paint creatures and develop characters and, make backgrounds for the epic story experience of MATSU. I'm talking about painting inside yourself. Each one of us has a very powerful imagination. And I think that's the source and the origin of who we all are. The I am, who I am, where I am. Because remember, in this world, we get labeled with all kinds of images, that came from, social institutions, information, media, even our families. And all these images have been stacked on our original self, which I like to call the soul pool. And that's where all the poetry remains, right? And so when I write poetry, a lot of times I don't know what I'm going to write about. I'll just go on a whim, either a word that's interesting or just curiosity. And I just have gotten a habit over all my life to write it every day. And so when I write it, I don't know exactly where it's going. But one thing I have come to know is that when I write poetry, it defines who I am. It orients me and reveals where I am inside my life and who I am in this world, right? Same thing with reading. People think you just read a poem. Well, especially when you write your own poem and then you read it back, especially when you bring it into an animated story, you express yourself at a level that's, communicating to the world. And so you paint from your imagination. And I like to believe that poetry is the freedom of language, the ability to speak to yourself in your own original language without all the world's cliches and all the symbols. I like to also think poetry is the original language, right? It determines who you are in this world. There's only two major things I know in this world that really define who you are uniquely compared to everyone else in the world, is how you arrange symbols, right? And the frequency your voice, vibrates at and talks at. No one else has those signature prints, just like your fingerprint. No one else has that. And so painted is painting inside your imagination. speaking to yourself in your own imaginative language, right? And that's the beginning of creation too. All creation comes from imagining it first, right? So the second principle is painted poetic, right? Poetic is communicating it to the world and using simile and metaphor and putting images next to each other that, you know, have never been done before. Like if I say, you know, tower, spring meadow, feather, dollar bill, museum, right? You've never heard those combined that way. And most people go, that doesn't mean anything. But that's when you go deeper into reading the poem, it's all symbolic. So when you go into each one of those words, you see an original pattern, right? You don't conform to the patterns of this world, you transform, right? Through the renewing of your mind. And how you renew your mind is using poetic terms to communicate. So first it starts in your mind as a painted imagery. You're painting pictures with words, right? And then you speak it and you communicate it. Everyone has to speak, you know, to get your laundry done, you know, to pay your bills, to get love, to communicate to your loved ones, to get fed, you know, to get paid, right? You got to use language, right? And poetry gives you an original space to find that language. So it's a painted, poetic, then it's symphony. And symphony came to me because it's a metaphor to me, a symbol for being orchestrated in your life. Not just being ordinary, you know, combining, you know, percussion, right? Combining strings and horns and every instrument out there, right? Which has a different voice and a different emotion. And so if it's a painted poetic symphony, you're painting first with your mind, right? That's your imagination. Poetic, you're communicating it, right? That's the second stage of creating anything. Third stage is unifying it, right? Symphony is unifying everything, right? And the last thing is implementing it, right? The reality that comes into focus, right? And that makes who you are in this world, which brings out your purpose, right? So once again, in poetry, look at it as your compass to yourself. You know, inside yourself, you have worlds and worlds and worlds, where you came from, where you're going, and it's all determined by you. So live a painted, poetic symphony. Thank you all for tuning in. I'm glad you kicked it on your creature cushion and listen right here to I Paint Creatures. And I'll be back with more videos. Going to try to do them once a week. Probably the frequencies will start to happen more and more as I get more comfortable doing this, and also bringing in the collaborators making art together, supporting unity. Hit that subscribe button, tell everyone else about it, because, you know, finally I'm so excited that the epic story experience of MATSU is coming to you soon. Animated form, puppetry, all the good stuff. So take care and tune back in, hit that subscribe, and let's do this thing. Let's do the MATSU.